Think Suriname is just another small South American country nobody talks about? Wait until you find out about the escaped slave communities that created their own nations in the jungle, the country where 80% of the land is untouched rainforest but most people can't legally own it, and the shocking fact that this tiny nation exports more gold per capita than almost anywhere on Earth. Number 15. Suriname has communities of escaped slaves who built their own independent nations in the rainforest and still live exactly like their ancestors did 300 years ago. You heard right. While most of the world moved into the modern era, 6 distinct maroon tribes in Suriname have maintained African kingdoms deep in the Amazon rainforest since the 1600s. These aren't tourist attractions or cultural reenactments. These are real, functioning societies with their own governments, laws, and traditions that have remained virtually unchanged for centuries. The largest group, the Saramaka people, number around 58,000 and control territories larger than some European countries. Here's what's incredible. They still speak languages that are direct mixtures of West African dialects and Dutch, creating communication systems that linguists consider living time capsules. When you visit these communities, you're literally stepping back in time to experience pre-colonial African society preserved in the South American jungle. The psychological impact is overwhelming. Imagine meeting people whose daily lives, spiritual practices, and social structures are identical to what their great-great-great-grandparents practiced as free Africans centuries ago. Number 14. This country is 93% covered by pristine rainforest, making it the most forested nation on Earth. But almost nobody is allowed to own land there. Suriname has maintained 93% forest coverage while countries like Brazil lose thousands of acres daily. But here's the crazy part. The government owns virtually all the land, and citizens can't buy property in most of the country. Think about living somewhere where you can't own the ground under your feet, even if you're born there. The forest is so untouched that satellite imagery shows Suriname as one giant green blob with just a tiny strip of development along the coast. This creates a bizarre situation where you have one of the world's most pristine environments, but the 600,000 people living there are essentially eternal renters on their own homeland. Here's what tourists don't expect. Traveling just 50 miles inland from the capital means entering completely wild territory where GPS doesn't work. Cell service disappears, and you're surrounded by forest that has never been logged. The psychological effect of being in such pristine wilderness is profound. Many visitors report feeling like they've discovered a secret planet hidden inside our own. Number 13. Suriname's population speaks more languages per capita than anywhere else in the world, with most citizens fluently switching between 4 to 6 completely different languages in a single conversation. In a country of just 600,000 people, you'll hear Dutch, English, Hindi, Javanese, Chinese, Portuguese, Spanish, and about 15 indigenous languages spoken fluently by regular citizens. This isn't people showing off their education, this is daily survival. A typical conversation in Paramaribo might start in Dutch, switch to Hindi when talking about food, change to English for business, and end in Sranantongo, the local Creole, for emphasis. Here's the mind-bending part. Children grow up thinking this linguistic chaos is normal, developing brains that can process multiple language systems simultaneously without conscious effort. Linguists study Surinamese children because they represent the most multilingual population on Earth. The practical result is that most Surinamese can communicate with almost anyone from anywhere, making them natural diplomats and translators. What's really fascinating is that different languages are used for different emotional states. People might argue in Dutch, express love in Hindi, and tell jokes in Sranantongo, creating a unique psychological landscape where identity changes with language. Number 12. There's a Surinamese gold mine where workers regularly find nuggets worth more than houses, but the environmental destruction is so severe that entire rivers have turned orange and fish are dying by the thousands. The Rosebel gold mine produces over 300,000 ounces of gold annually, and workers have found individual nuggets worth $50,000 or more. But here's the scary part. The mining operations use massive amounts of mercury and cyanide that seep into the water system, turning rivers bright orange and creating dead zones where nothing can survive. The contrast is devastating. Workers are literally pulling fortunes from the ground while simultaneously destroying the ecosystem that supports local communities. Indigenous villages downstream from mining operations report that their traditional fishing areas have become toxic wastelands, where even touching the water causes skin irritation. The psychological impact on local communities is profound. They're watching their ancestral lands being turned into moonscapes in exchange for wealth they'll never see. What makes this even more tragic is that illegal small-scale miners called garimperos use even more dangerous methods, dumping pure mercury directly into rivers. The result is an environmental catastrophe happening in one of the world's most pristine rainforests, creating a bizarre situation where incredible natural beauty exists just miles away from industrial devastation. Number 11. Suriname has neighborhoods where Dutch colonial mansions sit next to Hindu temples, Chinese pagodas, and Islamic mosques, all within the same city block. Paramaribo looks like someone took pieces of Amsterdam, Mumbai, Jakarta, and Mecca, and randomly assembled them into a single city. This isn't planned multiculturalism. This is the chaotic result of centuries of immigration creating the world's most diverse capital city. You can literally walk from a perfectly preserved 17th century Dutch colonial building to an elaborate Hindu temple, to a Chinese restaurant, to an Islamic mosque in under 5 minutes. Here's what's incredible. Each community maintains its architectural traditions so precisely that sections of Paramaribo look like movie sets from different continents. The Dutch colonial district is so authentic that it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, while the Hindu quarter contains temples that would fit perfectly in India. The psychological effect on visitors is disorienting. You feel like you're teleporting between different countries every few blocks. Local children grow up thinking this architectural chaos is normal, developing a unique sense of identity that incorporates elements from every major world culture. What's really remarkable is that these communities have lived side by side for generations without losing their distinct cultural identities, creating a living museum of global civilization in the heart of the South American rainforest. Number 10. This country produces more gold per capita than almost anywhere on Earth. But most citizens have never seen the wealth because 90% of mining profits leave the country immediately. Suriname exports over $1 billion worth of gold annually from a population of just 600,000 people. That's nearly $1,700 worth of gold per citizen every year. But here's the tragic irony. Most Surinamese live in poverty, while their country's natural resources make foreign investors incredibly wealthy. The gold rushes create boom towns that appear overnight, complete with expensive restaurants, luxury hotels, and high-end shopping. But when the gold runs out, these towns become ghost towns within months. You heard right. Entire cities rise and fall based on gold discoveries, creating a bizarre cycle of extreme wealth followed by complete abandonment. The psychological impact is devastating. Local communities watch foreigners get rich from their land while they struggle to afford basic necessities. Here's what's really twisted. Many Surinamese work dangerous jobs in gold mines for wages that wouldn't buy them a single gram of the gold they're extracting. The contrast is surreal. Workers risk their lives pulling gold from the earth while living in poverty, creating a form of modern colonialism where the country's greatest natural resource becomes its greatest source of inequality. International mining companies extract millions of dollars worth of gold monthly, while contributing minimal taxes or infrastructure improvements to local communities. Number 9. There are indigenous tribes in Suriname who still use traditional poison arrows that can kill a person in minutes, and they're completely legal for hunting and fishing. The Tirio and Guyana peoples have perfected poison arrow technology that would make medieval assassins jealous. These aren't museum pieces, these are functional weapons used daily for hunting that can kill large animals within minutes of impact. The arrows are tipped with curare, a plant-based poison so potent that it causes complete muscle paralysis and respiratory failure. Here's the scary part. The poison is so precisely formulated that it kills animals quickly without contaminating the meat, making it safe to eat prey killed with poison arrows. The indigenous knowledge required to create these poisons has been passed down through generations, with master poison makers guarding their recipes like state secrets. What's incredible is that pharmaceutical companies spend millions trying to synthesize these natural compounds for medical use, while indigenous hunters continue using traditional methods that are more effective than anything modern chemistry has produced. The psychological contrast is striking. In a world of high-tech weapons, these communities rely on Stone Age technology that's actually superior for their needs. Anthropologists who study these tribes report that the poison-making process involves elaborate rituals and spiritual preparations, turning weapon creation into a sacred ceremony. The arrows themselves are works of art, with intricate decorations and personal symbols that identify each hunter, making them both deadly weapons and cultural artifacts. Number 8. Suriname has a Chinese community that arrived as indentured servants but now controls most of the country's retail economy, creating the bizarre situation where you need to speak Mandarin to shop in many stores. Over 40,000 Chinese immigrants arrived in Suriname starting in the 1850s, and their descendants now own an estimated 80% of the retail businesses in the country. Walk through any commercial district in Paramaribo, and you'll find that most shop signs are in Chinese characters, with Dutch and English translations underneath. Here's what's mind-bending. Many Chinese Surinamese families have lived in South America for 5 generations but still speak better Mandarin than Dutch or English. The community maintains such strong cultural ties to China that children routinely travel to mainland China for education, creating a constant flow of people and culture between Suriname and Asia. What's really fascinating is that Chinese New Year in Suriname is celebrated with more enthusiasm than in many parts of China, with elaborate parades, fireworks displays, and traditional performances that draw tourists from across South America. The economic impact is staggering. Chinese Surinamese businesses control supply chains for everything from groceries to electronics, meaning that most products consumed in Suriname pass through Chinese-owned companies at some point. This creates a unique situation where understanding Chinese culture is essential for economic success in a South American country. The psychological effect on other ethnic groups is complex. There's admiration for Chinese business success mixed with concerns about economic dominance by a single community. Number 7. There's a Surinamese currency crisis so severe that people use US dollars for everything while their own money becomes worthless, but the government refuses to officially adopt the dollar. The Surinamese dollar has lost over 95% of its value since 2015, making it essentially worthless for major purchases. Citizens routinely carry bags full of local currency to buy basic groceries, while landlords, car dealers, and electronics stores only accept US dollars. Here's the absurd part. The government continues printing Surinamese dollars that nobody wants while refusing to officially dollarize the economy like Ecuador or El Salvador did. This creates a bizarre parallel economy where official prices are listed in Surinamese dollars, but everyone actually pays in US dollars using unofficial exchange rates that change daily. Picture this. You go to a restaurant where the menu lists prices in local currency, but when you try to pay with local money, they laugh and ask for real money, meaning US dollars. The psychological impact is devastating. Imagine living in a country where your own government's money is treated like monopoly money by your own citizens. ATMs dispense worthless local currency while black market money changers on street corners deal in US dollars like drug dealers. The situation is so ridiculous that some businesses post daily exchange rates on whiteboards, updating them multiple times per day as the local currency continues its freefall. Workers demand salary payments in US dollars, but many employers can only pay in local currency, creating a constant cycle of financial stress and economic uncertainty. Suriname has communities where traditional African drumming is so loud and honestly so continuous that it can be heard from 10 miles away. But, playing certain rhythms outside designated areas is strictly forbidden by tribal law. The Maroon communities there maintain African drumming traditions that are, more authentic than anything you'll find in modern Africa. During spiritual ceremonies, master drummers play non-stop for up to 72 hours, creating rhythmic patterns so complex and powerful that the sound actually carries for miles through the forest. Here's what's incredible. These drum rhythms contain coded messages that can communicate specific information across vast distances, basically turning the forest into a giant communication network using nothing but sound. Different rhythm patterns announce births, deaths, warnings, celebrations, and, even gossip, creating a sophisticated information system that predates radio, telephone, and internet by centuries. But here's the scary part. Playing sacred rhythms without proper authorization is considered a serious spiritual crime that can result in exile from the community. The drums themselves are considered living entities with their own spirits, and touching them without permission is believed to bring catastrophic consequences. The psychological power of these drumming sessions is overwhelming. Participants often enter trance states that can last for hours, and visitors report feeling hypnotized by the complex polyrhythms. What makes this even more fascinating is that master drummers undergo decades of training to learn rhythm patterns that are more mathematically complex than most classical music. The acoustic properties of the forest amplify the drums so effectively that ceremonies can be heard from neighboring countries, making Suriname's jungle honestly one of the loudest places on earth during spiritual celebrations. There's a massive lake in Suriname that was created by flooding an entire forest, and now the treetops stick out of the water like a giant underwater graveyard that's, well, slowly driving people insane. Lake Brokopondo was created in 1964 when the Suriname River was dammed, flooding 1,560 square kilometers of pristine rainforest. The water level rose so quickly that there was no time to clear the forest, leaving hundreds of thousands of dead trees standing in the lake like massive tombstones. Here's the terrifying part. 40 years later, these petrified trees are still perfectly preserved underwater, creating an eerie landscape that looks like something from a horror movie. Fishermen report that navigating the lake at night is, honestly, psychologically traumatic because the moonlight reflects off the dead tree branches sticking out of the water, creating shadows that look like reaching hands and grasping fingers. The acoustic properties of the submerged forest create strange echoing effects where sounds bounce off underwater tree trunks, making voices and boat engines echo in ways that just don't seem natural. Local communities believe the lake is haunted by the spirits of animals that drowned when the forest was flooded, and many residents report hearing howling and crying sounds coming from the water at night. The psychological impact on local fishermen is so severe that many refuse to fish alone, and there are documented cases of people suffering anxiety attacks while crossing the lake. What makes this even more disturbing is that the submerged forest is so well preserved that scuba divers can swim through underwater tree canopies that look exactly like living forests, except everything is dead and covered in algae. The contrast between the beautiful lake surface and the underwater graveyard below creates a constant reminder of environmental destruction that, honestly, never heals. Climate scientists study the lake because the decomposing underwater forest releases methane gas, contributing to greenhouse gas emissions decades after the original flooding. Number 4. Suriname has gold miners who work completely naked in rivers for 12 hours a day, and they've developed a unique culture where clothing is considered bad luck that will make the gold disappear. In remote areas along the Suriname River, small-scale gold miners, known as pork knockers, work completely nude while panning for gold, believing that wearing clothes will prevent them from finding precious metals. This isn't about comfort or practicality. This is a deeply held spiritual belief that has developed over generations of mining culture. Here's what's incredible. These miners have developed superhuman tolerance for river water that would be unbearably cold for most people, and they can work in water up to their necks for entire days without suffering hypothermia. The mining process involves standing in rivers using mercury to separate gold from sediment, meaning these workers are exposing their naked bodies to highly toxic chemicals on a daily basis. The psychological aspects of this culture are fascinating. Miners develop an almost mystical relationship with the rivers, claiming they can feel where gold is located and that the metal calls to them through the water. What makes this even more surreal is that successful miners can find gold nuggets worth thousands of dollars while working completely naked with the most primitive tools imaginable, creating a bizarre contrast between extreme poverty and potential instant wealth. The health consequences are devastating. Prolonged exposure to mercury and cold water causes neurological damage, skin diseases, and reproductive problems. But miners continue because they believe clothing will curse them with permanent poverty. Communities of naked miners have developed their own social hierarchies, spiritual practices, and economic systems based entirely around nude gold prospecting. The sight of dozens of naked men standing waist-deep in rivers, working with mercury and primitive tools while searching for fortune, creates one of the most surreal images of modern economic desperation found anywhere on Earth. Number 3. There's a Surinamese town where every single building is built on stilts because the ground is so saturated with water that regular foundations would sink within months, creating an entire floating community. The town of Galabai sits on land so waterlogged that walking on the ground feels like walking on a giant wet sponge. Every house, store, school, and even the church is built on wooden stilts that extend 8 to 12 feet above the soggy earth. Here's what's mind-blowing. The entire community has adapted so completely to living above ground that children learn to walk on elevated wooden walkways before they learn to walk on solid earth. The psychological adjustment for visitors is extreme. Imagine living in a place where the ground is essentially quicksand and every building looks like it's preparing for a flood that never comes. During high tide, water actually flows under the buildings, making the entire town look like it's floating on a massive lake. The engineering challenges are incredible. Every structure requires specialized construction techniques using local hardwoods that can withstand constant moisture without rotting. What makes this even more surreal is that residents have developed unique social customs around their elevated lifestyle. Children play games that involve jumping between buildings, and adults have learned to identify people by the sound of their footsteps on different wooden platforms. The acoustic properties of the elevated town create a constant symphony of creaking wood, footsteps, and voices that carry across the entire community. During storms, the entire town sways gently in the wind, creating a nautical experience in the middle of the rainforest. The psychological impact of living in a constantly moving environment affects residents' balance and spatial perception, with many reporting that they feel dizzy when visiting towns built on solid ground. Emergency services have to use boats to reach certain parts of town even during dry seasons, making this community more like a land-based cruise ship than a traditional village. Number 2. Suriname has an indigenous healing practice where shamans use toxic plants to induce controlled death experiences, and patients regularly die for hours before being brought back to life with antidotes. The Tario shamans practice a form of medical treatment that involves administering plant-based toxins that completely stop patients' heartbeats and breathing for extended periods. This isn't metaphorical or spiritual death. Patients are clinically dead by medical standards, with no detectable vital signs for up to 6 hours. Here's the terrifying part. The shamans use precise combinations of jungle plants to control exactly how long patients remain dead, and they claim this death experience allows them to communicate with spirits who provide medical diagnoses and treatment recommendations. The plants used include some of the most potent natural toxins on Earth, including extracts from poison dart frogs and toxic tree bark that can kill instantly if the dosage is miscalculated by even tiny amounts. The psychological experience for patients is indescribable. They report traveling to other dimensions, meeting deceased relatives, and receiving medical information that later proves accurate when tested by Western doctors. What makes this even more incredible is that shamans who perform these procedures undergo decades of training to learn precise antidote formulations that can revive patients from clinical death, making them essentially master chemists with knowledge that surpasses modern pharmacology. The revival process involves complex combinations of stimulant plants, physical manipulation, and spiritual rituals that must be timed perfectly, or the patient will remain permanently dead. Medical researchers who have studied these practices report that patients who undergo controlled death experiences show improved immune function, reduced chronic pain, and resolution of psychological trauma that conventional medicine couldn't treat. The shamans claim that many diseases exist in spiritual dimensions that can only be accessed through death, making this practice a form of interdimensional medicine that bridges the gap between life and death. The legal and ethical implications are staggering. These procedures would be considered murder in most countries, but in Surinamese indigenous communities they're considered advanced medical treatment. Number 1. Suriname is the only country in the world where you can legally own human remains as private property, and there's actually a thriving black market where collectors pay thousands of dollars for specific types of skulls and bones. Under Surinamese law, human remains that are discovered on private property belong to the landowner, creating a legal framework that allows private ownership of human skulls, bones, and even complete skeletons. This isn't some obscure legal loophole. This is an active market where archaeological discoveries are regularly sold to private collectors, museums, and researchers for substantial amounts of money. Here's the shocking part. Gold miners and construction workers routinely discover indigenous burial sites and immediately contact bone dealers rather than archaeologists, because a complete pre-Columbian skeleton can sell for $15,000 to $50,000, depending on its condition and estimated age. The psychological impact of living in a country where human remains are treated as valuable commodities is disturbing. Imagine knowing that your ancestors' bones might be sitting in someone's private collection or being sold on the internet. The bone trade has created an entire underground economy where grave robbers systematically loot ancient burial sites, and law enforcement can't prosecute them because technically they're not breaking any laws if they have permission from landowners. What makes this even more horrifying is that some collectors specialize in specific types of remains. There are people who only collect children's skulls, others who focus on skulls showing evidence of ancient surgical procedures, and some who pay premium prices for bones with unusual deformities or injuries. The international implications are staggering. Surinamese human remains are legally exported to private collectors worldwide, making this tiny South American country the global headquarters for the legal human bone trade. Indigenous communities report that their sacred burial grounds are being systematically destroyed by bone hunters, but they have no legal recourse because they don't technically own the land where their ancestors are buried. The ethical questions are mind-bending. In a world where most countries have strict laws protecting human remains, Suriname has created a legal system where death becomes a commodity and human dignity has a literal price tag. Anthropologists estimate that thousands of indigenous skeletons have been removed from Suriname and sold to private collectors, making this one of the largest organized desecrations of indigenous burial sites in modern history. So we've just discovered Suriname's most unbelievable secrets, from legal human bone markets and controlled death healing to floating towns and naked gold miners. Which one shocked you the most? Subscribe for more mind-blowing facts about the world's most mysterious countries.